Hi folks, my name is Mike Dobbs. I'm your host for Government Matters here on FOCUS Springfield. We have not one but two guests this particular episode, and we're very, very happy to have Tito Jackson with us. Tito Jackson is a former city councilor in Boston, and he is owner, I want to get the name right, of Apex Noire, which is a dispensary located at Faneuil Hall. That gives me a reason to actually go to Boston and see what your dispensary is like.
Come on in.
Okay.
That's a great excuse.
And our second guest has been here several times before, Payton Shubrick, who is the owner of Shubrick's Dispensary here in Springfield. Thank you both for coming in. Thank you, Mr. Jackson, for making the arduous journey from Boston. So far, you haven't complained about the fact that you had to drive all the way to Springfield. Most Boston people do say that to us. They do want to make sure that they've made a sacrifice.
The sacrifice was worth it, and now that I heard that there are certain food spots that I really like that are coming back, that's going to be even more worth it.
We will keep you. I will personally keep you in the loop.
Please do.
This is going to be a discussion about the next evolution in Massachusetts' journey about legalization of cannabis. Yes, both medical and adult cannabis use, recreational use are legal. We all know that. But there's now a next step, and that next step is what the Cannabis Control Commission talks as social consumption. You and I would probably say smoking lounges. Now, just to be clear, these two folks were kind enough to join us for this conversation, and we were supposed to have two other people here as well, members of the Cannabis Control Commission, so we could get the viewpoints of licensees and regulators. However, they eventually declined our invitation, which is unfortunate, but I think we're going to have a very good discussion about what this next step looks like at this point, and how seasoned licensees, like these two folks, what they see as the potential in this. So, Mr. Jackson, I'm going to go with you first. Can I call you Tito? Is that okay?
Tito was absolutely
Okay.
fine, and I've been called some other things, but Tito.
Well, you were
really,
a city councilor in
yeah,
Boston.
Yeah, exactly,
so,
exactly.
And as the next newspaper people, yeah, we get the good.
I've definitely been called some things by newspaper people.
Okay.
So that's.
So, last December, the CCC announced on their website that social consumption is the next thing they're going to do. They outlined it in sort of very broad terms, and according to the website here, they believe that the final regulations for social consumption in the Commonwealth would be set by mid-2025. We're sitting here almost March. So we're heading toward mid-2025 with a fair amount of speed at this point. What I'd like to ask you, Tito, I'm just going to read this and then I want you to help translate this because unfortunately the CCC website talks about this issue in terms and jargon that the average person, including potential entrepreneurs as well as potential customers, might have a little bit of trouble understanding. So first of all, we've got three kinds of licenses: a supplemental, and that is for on-site consumption, for cultivators, product manufacturers, retailers, micro-businesses, craft marijuana cooperatives, or delivery people. Then we have the hospitality, which is new or existing non-cannabis business hosting on-site consumption, partnering with a qualified cannabis establishment. And then last, and certainly not least, event organizer. So this would be a qualified cannabis host consumption events with maximum of 24 events with no more than 5 days, a maximum of 25 within a year. They can't be 5 days, any longer than 5 days. So let's decode this a little bit.
Yep.
So supplemental would mean folks like you and Payton.
Yeah.
You have licenses, you have dispensaries. You're first up with conceivably having social consumption or a smoking lounge. Am I right in this? And I'm going to ask, am I right? A great deal.
So
here.
yes, you are. So the supplemental license would be one that both Payton and I would be right for. The caveats are: one, you have to be part of the state's social equity program or part of the economic empowerment program. And these programs were set up and structured to combat the failed war on drugs. Right, so if people grew up in a neighborhood that was disproportionately affected by the war on drugs, someone in your family, in particular, a sibling or parent, went to jail over this. People who don't make $150,000 or more. So there's a kind of I think there's kind of 5 factors in that component. And so subset of the cannabis. So it's not the whole cannabis industry. So the multi-state operators and these large companies aren't allowed to participate initially, right? So there's that component. The second component would be a restaurant that may not be open on Mondays, who could partner with Payton or I and actually do a cannabis event. So they don't currently have a cannabis license. We do have a cannabis license, and we're able to connect and liaise with them. Interestingly, people are drinking less now. Now that cannabis is actually legal, the data actually shows people are actually oftentimes choosing cannabis, and oftentimes young people aren't even drinking. They're actually using cannabis. So there's an opportunity there. And then the events. Think of any festival. I know you guys have a really cool jazz festival out here. And it begins to destigmatize something that's legal and that's bringing in hundreds of millions of dollars to the bottom line of taxes. So like getting it out of this dirty little secret component, $1.6 billion and a couple $300 million in taxes. And we are now the number one cash crop in the state of Massachusetts. We have eclipsed cranberries.
I didn't know cranberries was the number one cash crop.
And we might have to figure out how to infuse some of that juice too.
Sure. So Payton, out of these 3, do you see yourself participating somehow in one or more of these categories?
Well, yes, in some capacity, but to clarify a point Tito made earlier, 6 bricks is not social equity, right? Okay. So we would be partnering with someone who is, as we think about bringing this license type to the city of Springfield. And I think all 3 have their pros and cons for various reasons. I mean, when we think about this license type, I think it's important to note that there will be an insurance component to it, right? Because you will need to have the appropriate coverage. And that piece still needs to be worked out as we think about, achieving the goal of actually making this a license type that you can apply for. But when you start to look at them, you have to start to figure out, them being the license type, what actually makes the most sense for the geographic location you're in and ultimately what you're hoping to achieve. I think that there is a world with social consumption where you can mimic that of a winery and really ensure that folks are able to go in and understand the difference in strains, cultivators, have conversations, be able to get back to the basics of cannabis consumption with phrases like the nose knows, right? When we look at the current market, there is a huge gap in education to both consumers and patients, which I'm hopeful social consumption can solve for, but it's hard to say which of the 3 license types makes the most sense right now without being able to really understand the economics, being 1, the insurance, which is a big sticking piece, but then also 2, if you are to progress forward with this license type, what are the requirements as it relates to security components? Because if it mimics that of a dispensary, right, it gets very costly very quickly, and therefore the event license type may be a better option because, as we know, for most cannabis licensure, financial costs are a barrier to entry for most people because it's so expensive and the licensure process takes so long. Ultimately, it can be cost ineffective to pursue certain license types, and these are the things I'm hopeful that the CCC is considering in terms of ensuring that we can get back to this notion of social equity being, in some cases, restorative justice for those folks who were adversely affected. And unfortunately, there's just not enough information around the economics from my perspective to make that informed decision right now.
What fascinates me about this is, again, a sort of, I hate to use this phrase because it's a cliche, a lack of transparency. I think that unless people actually go to this website and start reading this, it's hard for them to understand exactly who this is for. And I don't want to go off on a tangent, but my perception about the whole cannabis issue in Massachusetts is that there's been a lot of failed promises about, well, this is an entrepreneurship. This is, hey, you could have a cannabis dispensary or you could have a froyo. You could have frozen yogurt. It's like an entrepreneur thing. It's not at all, because the amount of money that you need to get your dispensary going is far beyond what normal folks who want to be an entrepreneur could ever afford. Those frozen yogurt machines is nothing compared to what you have to go through to get a dispensary. And yet it's sort of communicated, well, this is the entrepreneurial spirit, and it's not quite that. I think it transcends far that. So with these potential smoking lounges, the research I did said about half the states that have legalized cannabis have smoking lounges. I wonder that in your travels, have you seen any of these and how they operate, and would they provide a model for Massachusetts? Or from what you've seen the CCC has talked about, is this a better way to go?
I personally think what I've seen thus far is better than a lot of other states. There are some states in New Jersey, they don't allow you to actually serve water. So literally, you're able to consume, but like this is a no-no.
Okay, so what is the logic behind not serving someone a bottle of water to smoke their joint with?
I have no idea. Payton may be better than me. I cough sometimes when I ingest. And Mom, yes, I did. Yes, I didn't roll it, but I definitely did smoke it. But when it comes down to it,
I like the use of your camera.
Yes, thank you. Nice. So that piece is important. As Payton noted, we have to pull back and actually, you said the word entrepreneur, which means we need to run profitable businesses. There's not a bailout coming for the cannabis industry. And so when it comes down to it, these rules matter, right? So things like what ways are we able to make money? So in the supplemental model, we both have dispensaries. You're technically, as long as the dispensary is not operating, you actually can have folks consume in your dispensary. It's a little bit actually different than a winery, because actually they're able to transact and you're able to drink at the same time. So that may be something that we should talk about, right? But then on the hospitality side, I actually own a bar and lounge. As long as we're not serving alcohol, the other pieces you could potentially do food, an infused restaurant. Where people who don't necessarily maybe even want to smoke, who maybe want to eat it in their food. And I have, for research and development purposes, gone to some of these things. It was a very nice 5-course meal, and you could choose nothing, CBD only. It was low dose THC, 10 milligrams over the course of a couple hours, and 20 milligrams over the course of a couple hours. Wonderful, wonderful time. And I was actually happy for 2 days after that. And then in addition, on the other piece around, as Payton noted, the events component, most of this legislation was written as alcohol. There are a ridiculous number of alcohol festivals. I don't know how much alcohol gets served at the Big E, but it's probably a whole lot of alcohol that gets.
It is considerable, yeah.
Right? Yeah. And so we have to get to a place where we normalize this. And this is about normalization. It's also about equity. If you're poor, you may live in I shouldn't even say poor. I live in Boston. It's $3,000 for a two-bedroom apartment. So you don't have to be poor, but you can't smoke in your apartment. And so if you have subsidized housing, you can lose your subsidy for smoking. So it also is an equitable approach to this. And by the way, and I'll just close with, you voted for this in 2016. It was in the initial 2016 legislation, and we're just getting to it.
It's important for everyone listening and viewing this to understand that cannabis is still federally illegal, which means that as we think about this entrepreneurial spirit, right, it takes on a different level of commitment and determination, because you can't go to a bank with a business plan and you can't secure loans, right? So when you think about the journey that someone has to take who's an entrepreneur in cannabis, there is a determination and grit inherently in that individual because of how many barriers to entry are there, from both the financial aspect of it to the insurance pieces and everything in between. Not to mention the length of time that you wait throughout licensure, all while having control of your property. I am hopeful that based on the way in which these license types are structured, in theory, they should give us an advantage, right? In practice, though, is typically where we've seen things have a significant departure from that reality. If we look at the delivery license type, which was also exclusive to social equity, right? That wasn't a profitable business model because it required 2 delivery drivers in the vehicle, right? Looking at that with minimum wage and a minimum order on top of fuel, the cost of the vehicle, so on and so forth, we still haven't seen a way in which social equity applicants are given a license type that truly does benefit them in a way that's not just exclusive to them for the sake of exclusivity, but provides them with a profitable path forward. And I do think that social consumption can get us there, but it's going to require a more proactive approach from the CCC versus reactive. And unfortunately, as we think about the CCC, we really haven't seen them be more proactive in their approach to things, right? Thinking about the timeline that Tito has spoken to, right? If we voted to legalize in 2016 and we're now having the conversation in 2025, and yet we still have none of these operations open and available, it leaves a lot to be desired as we're losing our footing to other states. I mean, New Jersey has regs. They're talking about moving forward with gusto, right? So if that $1.6 billion means something to us as a Commonwealth, now is our time to act and be mindful of, are we furthering stigmas with the rules and regulations we're putting around these license types, or are we opening the door to educate not only consumers but patients, right? People who are using cannabis as a part of their wellness routine. As retail owners, right, we have people who are coming in not looking to get high just for the sake of being high, but the top 3 uses are sleep, stress, and anxiety, right? So when you think about that, how do I help an individual who wants to understand how to better use cannabis as a part of their wellness routine so they have a better night's sleep? But then I'm reduced down to only prepackaged goods, very limited conversation at the cash register, and the inability to explain the differences in genetics and strains and so many things that makes cannabis what it is. So again, a lot left to be desired in terms of what we're seeing with the license type, but hope that those who are committed to going through this process will be able to do so profitably.
So I just want to go over another set of terms here. We've talked about social equity businesses. This would be available to them. Social equity program participants, is that the same as business owners?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
So the program is, so the first program that was put out was called Economic Empowerment, and it was only open for 2 weeks. Right, literally.
So you only had 2 weeks to apply.
Yes.
To be part of this.
To be part of it, which
Okay.
blows. And so the comeback to that is, first off, I've never seen a government program only open 2 weeks. And so the comeback to that was they actually have a newer program that came out after that. The first commissioned a social equity program, and it's rolling. So these are, folks can get into it. And so the real piece here is that unlike college, you don't have to graduate from the program to get the benefits. right? So the reason why we're saying kind of both, because I am in a social equity program and I have a business, but I also could take advantage of this even without having a business that's actually open, which is the opportunity there. So that's
Okay.
there's a broad universe of everybody, but there are these social equity businesses that are able to participate.
Okay. Micro businesses, again, so are these businesses that do have a license as a micro business? Again, I'm confused. Pardon my
cannabis
confusion.
work, so and it is very confusing. And we both have spent a whole lot of money to speak to consultants, lawyers, and all these other folks to navigate us through this. So in the cannabis space in the state of Massachusetts, there is a license that's called it's a micro license, which you're able to, what we would refer to as vertically integrate. You can grow, right? You can process and do manufacturing. Are they able to do a cultivation, but they're not able to have a dispensary.
Correct.
And so that's a micro business. So they're under a certain, what we refer to as canopy. They can only grow so much, and then they can also turn that. They could either sell it directly or they can turn it into candy, or things like that. So that's what a micro business is in a state.
So,
Trust and believe. My hair was all black when we first started this. Payton looks the same. My hair was all black, and now I look like Frederick Douglass.
so, see, this is part of my beef. I'd like things to be written in such a way that the average person who doesn't have to be an attorney can read and understand and see if this is a program that they can participate in, if this is something that they want to be a part in. And unfortunately, all of this jargon really, to me, is a way to create a barrier between people and understanding what government is talking about. I will say that the CCC's jargon is not quite as bad as the educational jargon. Just attend, as I have, school committee meetings and count the acronyms. And after a while, you understand why parents get frustrated, because it can be confusing. So I know that both of you, as licensees, as part of this process, had to go about a security plan, security people. You have to have more security than perhaps I think any other retail business other than banks, frankly. I mean, you've got security all over the place in various steps. So part of the issue that I've heard from law enforcement is the issue of intoxication. How do we keep people who are consuming cannabis at an event or at a location? How do we keep them safe? How do we keep the public safe? Has there been conversation in your community, in the licensee community about that element of this?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different conversations happening relative to, are we treating this different than alcohol, right? In terms of, let's be clear, the science is not there where we can have the equivalent of a breathalyzer. But at the same time, when we look at the way in which we are structured in the cannabis industry, we have daily allotment limits, right? So you can only allow a person to pick up 1 ounce every day. Right? But I could go down to my local liquor store, back up my vehicle, and as much as my Lincoln Nautilus can hold, I can buy, right? And so fundamentally from day one, we've already created a dynamic where we're saying, within cannabis, we are going to govern how much you can procure per day. However, with liquor, we are not, right? And unfortunately, what you're seeing with social consumption is a further continuation of that, right? Where I agree, we need to ensure that folks can consume safely and get home safely, right? But when we think about it in the context of licensure in many respects, right, we also have to entrust that adults are going to be able to govern themselves in many ways, right? With Uber, Lyft, and many other things available to people as we start to focus more on the public safety aspects of validating how and who and when, right? I do think it only furthers the stigma. I think that there can be standards created, and this is where the CCC can provide guidance in terms of understanding what are going to be the defined ways in which we understand if someone has overconsumed and therefore should not be behind their wheel. You talked about other states and how they're doing it. They have cooling off periods, right, where you've consumed and now you have to essentially wait a period of time before you're able to exit to make sure that you're coming down from that high, right? There are also other products over the market, so on and so forth. So as we think about it, I would really urge the commission to acknowledge what we have seen from alcohol businesses, right, and not overextend their reach, while concurrently using the 3 paid researchers on staff, really start to think about how we make this license types viable without putting more ownership on the entrepreneurs who are seeking the license type, because there's still so much that has to be figured out.
You must, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but you must be in an have an interesting perspective because you own a bar and you own a dispensary.
Yeah.
So you are seeing these products and how they are served to the public in a real comparison, like every day then.
Yeah. As Payton is talking, you have to be TIPS certified to work in a bar. Right. And I would submit cannabis is not brand new. Right? So it's not as if it was when OxyContin came on the marketplace and it was a brand new pharmacology in terms of how something was going to work. So one, we're not talking about this net new thing that people have no idea about, right? So I think we need to start there. In addition, nobody worries about this more than people who own a business in the cannabis space. And so, just as our individuals and who do law enforcement, we truly appreciate the work that they do. But we own this, and we stress about this, and we think when we're having conversations with folks in the insurance space, and we send out those payments every month, it's something that we are continuously thinking about. In addition, the component around, as noting, hopefully Payton would be buying Tito's, and if she was going to go to the liquor store. I personally think people would comport themselves better in a space that is professionally operated, and as a bar and someone who can actually look at them. What we now have is you take the product and we have to shoo you out. Right? So wherever they're consuming that, however they're consuming it, we actually have no, and in fact, most of us have something that says, hey, we want to make sure that people aren't consuming it right in front or whatever. So they're consuming it somewhere, right, out of our vision. And so I believe, would actually be able to comport ourselves and make sure that people are acting and being safer in our space rather than wherever they are going to use it. And so I think there's some work to do here. But the other piece is we sell it. What are they going to do with it? Right. And as a former city councilor, what I used to get calls, they're in the park. People in the park. Okay, so what do you want? Do you want me to call the police and have them arrest everybody and negate what we're actually trying to do, which is actually not incarcerate people? And also normalize it as a thing. Because right now, this is the equivalent of having only liquor stores and no bars. And if you want to have a drink, we got to go sit outside on the stoop. And drink. And so let's grow up with this. Allow folk to participate. And as I was saying, some of this may not be necessarily smoking. We know people do yoga. So this is the other piece too, is social consumption is the consumption of cannabis in any method possible. So if you were to get a massage, an infused massage would actually have to be regulated also by this too. So that would actually be social consumption. If you were at a movie theater and we had infused popcorn, that would also be social consumption. So I think that the other piece is that it should not only be conceived of as just smoking, but there are other methods to take it.
Well, we're out of time. I still got questions, but we can do this again because I'm going to be very curious to see come mid-2025 what they come up with. And let me just ask one more question and we'll close out. Does the legislature have to be involved with this? In other words, in terms of formulating the various rules and regs, is this something that they've got to run through the legislature, or can the CCC establish this stuff without their involvement?
So the legislature was already involved. So in 2016, when the bill passed, but then there needed to be a correction. Our Secretary of State said that it was written incorrectly, and that was the legislature fixed it. The sitting governor at the time, who was Charlie Baker, actually signed it into law, and so now it's in the executive branch, and this is technical term, promulgation of regulations. So basically you can do it, but now what we're talking about is what is it? Yeah. How do you do it? How many times does the air need to move around, and how much space? So it is down to the actual individual terms now. So that's where we're at. So legislature has already done theirs. By the way, shout out to the people of the state of Massachusetts, because, by the way, that's why it's legal, because it was not legislatively done. It was the people of the state, and that's who we are here to serve.
Yeah, most importantly. And I think that I acknowledge we're out of time. I think it's important to know that this license type is going to help the people of Massachusetts, right? When we think about the education available, our current dynamic within the adult use market is that if you have a larger marketing budget, you can say your product does all these amazing things. And because you're larger, you're probably in multiple locations. So people are seeing brands that are making claims, and yet there's not the social setting to then say, hey, you tried that. What is it actually like? Because people are reduced to their homes or to parks and many other spaces and places. So it's also the case that the people of Massachusetts have said they want this license type, and we're doing them a disservice by not providing it to them. And at the same time, we're allowing these larger entities to essentially misdirect folks who are chasing tack, looking for higher percentages, and not understanding the basics of this plant that can do so many amazing things, but is not currently being allowed to, because we're regulating it and reducing it, and still in some ways furthering the stigma around it, versus creating a dynamic where folks can access it. And that's what I think we have to look forward to with social consumption.
Thank you so much, you two, for coming in. Thank you, Tito, for driving in from Boston to discuss this. This is an ongoing discussion, obviously. So thank you again.
Thank you for having us.
And we look forward to having you at one of our establishments.
I go to hers.
He does.
To socially consume.
Okay. And folks, thank you very much for watching this episode of Government Matters here on FOCUS Springfield.